Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Vice Chair Lewis and the Capital Budget Subcommittee, I want to invite everyone to today's capital budget hearing. First, we have the Maryland School for the Deaf, and the budget analyst is Laura Hyde.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Again, this is Maryland School for the Deaf. Starting on page 1 with the Capital Improvement Program, Maryland School for the Deaf receives $12.2 million in fiscal 2026 for the high school residences on the Frederick campus. The Hessian Barracks project also receives $240,000 in funds for the first time in fiscal 2029. Turning to page 2, updates. The Vedditz building, which is first funded in fiscal 2018, is scheduled for completion in calendar 2025. The Columbia Campus Emergency Notification System, which was first funded in fiscal 2020, is on schedule to be completed in May 2025. Turning to page 3, this is the summary of the fiscal 2026 state-owned projects, and this focuses on the Frederick Campus High School residences. This project was initially funded in the fiscal 2024 CIP and involves 3 overlapping phases with the demolition of 3 buildings and the construction of 3 new dormitories. The project uses a construction manager at risk methodology and has had many changes and cost increases. The decision to use a what's called CM approach was made early in the process within the initial fiscal 2024 design funding. DLS notes that typically it is best practice to retain a CM in the first contract prior to solicitation of design. But unfortunately, it appears that an initial design solicitation took place without the services of a CM, and that the CM is currently not scheduled to be hired until July 2025. The bold language on page 5 asks the Department of General Services to brief the committees on the problems encountered with the initial design procurement and address the decision not to procure a CM contract from the outset with the initial fiscal 2024 design authorization. Turning to page 6 in Exhibit 1, this is MSD's current and projected enrollment for residential students. And then at the bottom of page 6 is a summary that involves the Hessian Barracks renovation. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance, and this concludes my presentation, and I will take your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hyde. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee for Ms. Hyde? This afternoon we have from the Maryland School for the Deaf, the Superintendent, John A. Serrano. Thank you very much for being here. And Ann Miller, too. Okay, great. Thank you. You can please get started. Thank you.
Hello and good afternoon, both the chair, vice chair, and members of the committee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today to speak to you all. So to reintroduce myself, my name is John Serrano. I'm the superintendent of the Maryland School for the Deaf, and with me is Ann Miller, Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer at MSD. I'd like to first extend my gratitude and appreciation to Ms. Laura Hyde's work on the analysis of our budget. At MSD, we are committed, of course, to maintaining and improving our facilities on both our Columbia and Frederick campuses to support our students and mission, which is to educate deaf and hard of hearing students in an environment that fosters both learning and personal growth. Earlier this month, we were very excited to officially kick off our Frederick campus new residential project in partnership with the architectural firm that has been secured, as well as the Department of General Services. Of course, our staff and our students are fully engaged in the design phase to ensure that our new dorms will reflect not only the needs and mission, but also the desires of those who will live here. It was both a very engaging and inspiring process. Really, the ability to see the students fully participate in designing their future home in the terms of the dorm that they'll be staying at was really inspiring. We appreciate the continued partnership with DBM and DGS for various projects as needed. Keeping that in mind, Maryland School for the Deaf concurs with the analysis recommendations presented. Ms. Miller and I are happy to any questions that any members of the subcommittee may have. Thank you so much again for your time and consideration this afternoon.
Great. Thank you very much, Superintendent Serrano, and thank you very much to the interpreters this afternoon. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee for Superintendent Serrano? Okay, great. Thank you very much. That concludes the hearing for the Maryland School for the Deaf. The committee will now move on to judiciary, and our budget analyst is Jacob Polakov.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Again, Jacob Polakov for the Department of Legislative Services with the analysis of the judiciary's capital budget for fiscal 2026. The CIP includes $51.117 million for the new Supreme Court of Maryland building in fiscal 2026. This project is funded in future years as well. The CIP also includes 3 other projects: the new Harford County District Court, the Washington County District Court renovation and expansion, and the new Anne Arundel County District Court, which are not funded this year, but we'll be discussing today to provide updates. On page 2, we have an observation that delays have impacted the project schedule for the new Supreme Court of Maryland building. Delay in the procurement of the construction services contract has necessitated a 1-year deferral to the start of construction for the new facility. As a result of the delay, the total cost to complete the project is now estimated at about $204.1 million. That's an increase of $11.1 million from last session's estimate. The judiciary should brief the committees on the current status of the construction services contract procurement and if the process will be completed in time to avoid additional delays to the start of construction. We have 2 recommended actions, and I can go through these now, and then we'll have some context in a moment. But the first recommendation is to reduce $25 million in general obligation bonds for the new Supreme Court of Maryland building. That will bring the authorization for this year to a total of $26.117 million. And in contrast, increasing the amount pre-authorized for the 2026 session. Originally, that was set to be about $81 million. We're proposing that it be $111.408 million. On page 3, we have a summary of the 2026 funded state-owned project, which is the new Supreme Court of Maryland building. That facility will house the Supreme Court, the Appellate Court of Maryland, the Thurgood Marshall State Law Library, and other judiciary units. It's replacing a facility that was constructed in 1972 with functionally obsolete mechanical systems, some structural issues, and insufficient space to meet the current and future needs housed in the facility. Additionally, the current building does not meet ADA requirements and does not have an effective layout for security. The $51.1 million of general obligation bond funds budgeted for the fiscal 2026 replaces $51.1 million of general funds appropriated for the project in fiscal 2024. Those funds are to be reverted to the general fund. The capital budget bill pre-authorizes $81.4 million for fiscal 2027 and $25.4 million for fiscal 2028. Due to issues with the procurement of the construction services contract, the start of construction was delayed a year from May of 24 to May of 25. This is the second delay in the start of construction, as the 2023 CIP indicated that construction would originally start in November of 2023. The previously noted delay has resulted in the total cost increase that I just mentioned of $11.1 million. The original bid for construction on this project was protested. The Department of General Services decided to move forward with the second solicitation and officially canceled the first procurement in October of 24 and notified the other bidders of the cancellation as required. DGS is currently preparing a new procurement solicitation for construction services and anticipates posting in May of 25, followed by requesting approval from the Board of Public Works no sooner than October of this year. The process will further delay the start of construction currently scheduled for May 2025 to likely October, November 2025, depending on the success of the solicitation. As a result, the amount needed in fiscal 2026 is less than the amount budgeted, especially when factoring in the availability of $32.6 million of previously authorized state funds for the project. Accordingly, the Department of Legislative Services recommends reducing the fiscal 2026 budget amount by $25 million to account for the revised schedule. DLS further recommends increasing the amount pre-authorized for the 2026 session to ensure that sufficient funds are authorized and pre-authorized for BPW to approve the construction contract when presented. At the bottom of page 4, we have some updates on the out-year state-owned projects. There's the new Harford County District Court. That'll involve the construction of a new facility with on-site parking, access roads, and site improvements in Bel Air for the District Court for Harford County. The existing facility doesn't have adequate space for the number of necessary courtrooms or other functions. The judiciary has acquired 3 adjacent parcels for this project, and negotiations to acquire a 4th are underway. As a result of the addition of the 4th parcel to the process, the start of the design process has been delayed to December 2027, and construction is now slated to begin in October 2029. The project is due to be complete in April of 2032, and the estimated total cost is $124.5 million, including $16 million previously provided for acquisition costs. The judiciary should comment on the current status of the acquisition negotiations for the 4th parcel for this project. The Washington County District Court renovation and expansion involves the renovation of the existing Hagerstown Courthouse, along with the construction of an addition. The existing structure will receive electrical, security, and HVAC infrastructure improvements. Space will also be added for a 3rd judge and necessary support services. This project has now been on hold for 3 years as the contract with the selected architect was terminated. The project now includes a 2nd architect to complete work necessary to hire a contractor. General funds of $5.3 million previously appropriated were inadvertently reverted during the fiscal 24 closeout. The fiscal 25 operating budget bill includes a deficiency appropriation to replace the funds, and a previous pre-authorization of $2.7 million for fiscal 26 is not included in the capital budget due to the delays in terminating the architect's contract. The capital budget bill pre-authorizes $3 million for fiscal 27, and the total cost of the project is now $15.3 million. Lastly, we have the new district court for Anne Arundel County. The project will construct a new courthouse to replace the existing facility in Glen Burnie. The project is currently scheduled for initial funding in fiscal 27, and according to the 2025 CIP, the funding program for fiscal 27 is to be used to acquire land for the new facility. The estimated total cost of the project is $117.1 million. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Polakov. Are there questions from members of the subcommittee for Mr. Polakov? Great. This afternoon we have for Judiciary, we have the Chief Justice Matthew Fader and also Chief Judge John Morrissey. We also have Carolyn Annison from the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services and Judy Rupp from Maryland Judiciary. Chief Judges, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. We appreciate your attention to these very important projects. Thank you to Mr. Polakov for his always thorough review. And we do accept the recommendations that were made. We've responded in writing and really don't have anything to add to the written submission, but are happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you very much. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee for the Chief Judge? Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Concludes the hearing for the capital budget for Judiciary. The committee will now move on to the Military Department, and our budget analyst is Yashidara Rai.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Today, I'll be presenting the fiscal 26 capital budget analysis for the Military Department. Cover charts on pages 1 and 2 show that the 5-year CIP includes 7 projects with 2 readiness centers, Glen Burnie and White Oak, receiving funding in fiscal 26. This will be discussed in today's presentation. Key observation at the bottom of page 2 highlights that the department's draft interim 10-year facilities master plan was submitted in June 2024. This updated master plan removed the Department of Emergency Management, which is no longer a military department component, and includes the department's capital investment strategies. Page 3 notes that the Harvard de Grace Combined Support Maintenance Facility is set to be completed in spring of 2025. The department notes that this project was recompeted for federal fiscal 2025 funding. We request the department to provide status of the federal funding and the possibility of receiving federal reimbursement for the state's share of the project design cost. Starting at the bottom of page 3 through page 6 are the two projects programmed in the fiscal 26 CIP. The first one is Glen Burnie Readiness Center that includes $176,000 in GEO bonds and $227,000 in federal funds to begin project design, which is scheduled to start in March 2025. The total estimated project cost has decreased by about $700,000 due to updated cost estimates. The entire project is anticipated to be complete in January 2028. The department anticipates receiving federal construction funding in federal fiscal 2026. The second project on pages 5 and 6 is the White Oak Readiness Center. This project includes $152,000 in GEO bonds in fiscal 26 to complete project design. This project was previously removed from fiscal 25 to 29 CIP as it did not receive federal funding due to federal budget constraints. But the National Guard Bureau still provided design funds for the project, and the department submitted 35% design in August 2024 to compete for the federal fiscal 2026 funding. The department is currently working on the design modifications that the NGB requested and expects to resubmit the revised project design for federal fiscal 27 funding by the June 2025 deadline. The total anticipated project cost has increased by $13.3 million due to inflation of construction costs. We request the department to comment on the contingency plan if the department fails to secure federal funds in fiscal 2027. Pages 6 and 7 describe the 5 out-year projects included in the 5-year CIP. The project that I want to highlight here is the Frederick Readiness Center that received its first authorization in fiscal 25. This project was also pre-authorized $2.68 million for fiscal 26 in the fiscal 25 capital budget. Due to the project's revised schedule, this project has been removed from the CIP and the pre-authorized amount has been deferred to fiscal 27, which is included in section 13 of the fiscal 26 capital budget bill. The other 4 out-year projects have yet to receive their first authorizations. At the bottom of page 7 is an update on the military department's 3 properties being divested. The Catonsville Readiness Center at Baltimore County is scheduled to be presented to BPW for its divestiture determination and will facilitate the construction of a cannabis incubator as required by Chapter 254 of 2023. The divestment of Kidd Readiness Center is pending on the availability of another readiness center to transfer the unit currently occupying this readiness center. Page 8 notes that the Annapolis Readiness Center renovation and expansion project has been removed from the 2025 CIP. This is at the department's request because this project has been deferred to fiscal 2031. On the Free State Challenge Academy renovations, phase 1 of the renovation project is complete. The phase 2 renovation contract is currently in BPW approval process and is expected to be complete by June 2025. As of January this year, $4.5 million of the project's total funding has been encumbered. On page 9, Exhibit 1 shows the percentage of the state's major air and Army facilities in fully functional status between fiscal 2020 and 2024. The Maryland Air National Guard facilities consistently maintain 100% functionality. The Maryland Army National Guard facility functionality lowered by 9% in fiscal 24. DLS's recommendation to concur with the governor's allowance for PAYGO federal fund of $227,000 and approved $328,000 in GEO bonds, including the deferred pre-authorization, are at the top of page 3. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rye. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee for Ms. Rye? Thank you. From the military department today, we have General Janine Burke, Major General Janine Burkhead. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the Capital Budget Subcommittee. I am Major General Janine L. Burkhead, and I'm honored to present the capital budget testimony for the Maryland Military Department. We thank our DLS analyst, Ms. Rye, and our DBM analyst, Mr. Wardrop, for their help and the support through the process. The department submitted written responses to the capital budget analysis to the committee. My remaining time before you today will focus on a few key items. To assist the state in current budget crisis, the department has revised several project timetables. That's for rural, Glen Burnie, White Oak, and Frederick, and deferred the $8.6 million to state funding planning in the FY 2025 through 2029 capital improvement plan for capital FY 26. The department has divested or are in the process of divesting of actually 2 properties. That would be Cascade in Washington County and Catonsville in Baltimore County, as referenced earlier. My top capital budget priority is the design and construction of a Joint Force Headquarters building at Camp Frederick in Reisterstown. The department asked for $7 million in state funding for design in FY 26. This building will allow the department to have effective command and control of our units in one location and instead of 3, Camp Frederick, Havre de Grace, and the 5th Regiment Armory in in Baltimore. The department has asked to respond to the following concern regarding 2 projects. For the Havre de Grace Combined Surface Maintenance Shop, the Surface Equipment Automotive Maintenance Facility, we were asked to brief the committees on the status of the Federal Physical 2025 Chief of Staff of the Army unfunded priority list, funding and the possibility of receiving federal reimbursement for the state's share of the project design cost. Unfortunately, the Maryland Army National Guard and the state of Maryland will not receive reimbursement for design cost. In discussion with the National Guard Bureau over the last couple of months, it is clear that the federal physical budget is also very restrictive in this regard. Thanks to the General Assembly and the Moore-Miller administration for agreeing to replace the federal funding shortfall for this project. This maintenance facility will serve the Maryland National Guard and ensure the readiness of our equipment to support state emergencies. For the White Oak Readiness Center renovation and expansion, we are asked to brief the committee on the department's contingency plan if the department fails to secure federal funds for the project in fiscal year 2027. First, we will apply for the 2027 Chief of Staff of the Army unfunded priority list. Second, we are in the process of submitting several CDS earmarks with the federal 27 budget. This funding strategy will require the active support of the Department of Legislative Services and the Department of Budget and Management to ensure federal funds and GO bonds are available to the capital budget should this project be picked up by the Chief of Staff of the Army unfunded priority list or through congressional spending. In conclusion, we concur with the DLS analyst and PAYGO recommended actions and the GO bond recommendation actions. And today I have with me Colonel Retired David Palucci, my Chief of Staff, Mr. Mark Freedy, Deputy Facilities Manager, and Ms. Linda Weaver, our Chief Financial Officer, and we're glad to take any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Major General Burkhead. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee for Major General? Great, thank you very much. That concludes the hearing for the military department. The committee will now move on to the Department of Environment, and our budget analyst is Andrew Gray.
Department of the Environment, or MDE's fiscal 2026 capital budget analysis. So that budget summary on page 1 gives the big picture of funding for the agency. What you're seeing there is through fiscal 2027, the federal funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and Inflation Reduction Act percolating through the agency's budget. And then after that, fiscal 28 through 2030, you're not seeing that funding anymore. The funding will then be expended. In terms of some of the programs that are not receiving funding in fiscal 2026, there are 2 here. The Supplemental Assistance Program, the Water Supply Financial Assistance Program, both will be receiving funding. Well, the purposes of those programs will be funded by the funding that's available from the Water Quality Revolving Loan Fund and the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund in terms of loan forgiveness that can help out those communities. And there's sufficient money for that purpose. Moving now to the PAYGO recommended actions on page 2, and capital recommended actions are to concur with the governor's authorization and allowance. In terms of another look at the program on Exhibit 1, just kind of shows you the breakdown on page 3 there, the kind of breakdown of funds. And the large decrease there is generally the federal funds, once again, for the Infrastructure Investment and Justice Jobs Act and for the Inflation Reduction Act. And then on page 6, so the information showing the kind of changes for the different programs. Largest change here is for the Bay Restoration Fund wastewater program, $10 million decrease there. Now moving to the Water Quality Revolving Loan Fund on page 7. Just notes some of the larger projects reflected there. On page 8, Exhibit 3 shows the federal funding and how it comes through the agency's budget, the base grant of $20.1 million, and the IIJA, Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act funding, general supplemental of $55 million. And the match funding is shown at the bottom of the page there. So one of the things that we've been looking at in terms of the funding that's coming through this particular, the federal funding coming through the Water Quality Revolving Loan Fund is the emerging contaminants funding, how that's being used. And the concern here is that it doesn't look like that we're applying for any of the federal funding for that purpose because we're not receiving any projects requesting money for that purpose, despite some of the state's requirements, including legislation from last year. And one of the projects that did receive funding, or was planned to receive funding, the Anne Arundel County Thermal Processing Demonstration Facility, was removed from the fiscal 2025 project list. Therefore, MDE should comment on why that project was removed from the list, and the overall need for emerging contaminants funding, and the overall plan for using the remaining funding that's available, including whether MDE has any role in assisting local jurisdictions to actually pursue that funding. Moving now to the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund on page 9. Then page 10 shows the projects. Page 11 shows, Exhibit 4 shows the federal funding, once again, in terms of the allocation for the base grant, the general supplemental funding, and then also the emerging contaminants, lead service line, smaller disadvantaged communities funding as well, and the state match. Now, for this particular program, on bottom of page 11, we're interested in the agency talking more about its encumbrance schedule. It's had some challenges in this area in terms of encumbering the funding in a timely manner, but now seems to be ramping up that encumbering, and would DLS recommends that MD comment on whether the encumbrance of $14.7 million in fiscal 2024 reflects kind of the level going forward or increase going forward. And also, MD should comment on the general project readiness for selected projects, given the low encumbrance levels that we've experienced in recent years. One of the requirements for projects to receive funding is that they're ready to go. And so why aren't these projects moving forward if, in theory, they applied and said that they were ready to go at that time? Moving now to the next part of the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund, federal funding. One of the main components is for the lead service line work. And the concerns here is that there's still a tremendous amount of information that we don't know about lead service lines in Maryland. And the question is, how are we going to be able to effectively use that federal funding, which is going to be ending fairly soon, to deal with our lead service line problems if we don't have the survey knowledge to really know where to go and do that work in the first place? One of the recent press releases in the fall reflected that Baltimore County and Baltimore City are fairly pleased with the amount of responses they were getting, but still had something like 120,000 remaining service lines of unknown material in Baltimore City. Excuse me, that was in Baltimore County. And then 215,000 or so remaining service lines in Baltimore City. MD should comment on the outcome of the statewide lead service line survey that was required to be submitted in October 2024, the overall status of lead service line inventorying in Maryland, and the public health repercussions if we're not able to use this money effectively. Moving now to the recommended, to the Bay Restoration Fund on page 15, or 14, at the very bottom of page 14. DLS recommends that MD comment on the status of efforts to improve the timeliness and detail of Controller Bay Restoration Fund revenue reporting. So The Bay Restoration Fund has about $115 million or so in recent years. However, it's fluctuated a fair amount. And some of that fluctuation appears to be due to the timing of money coming in as it's accounted for by the controller. And unfortunately, we're not getting kind of timely information about why some of those changes are occurring and why there are fluctuations from year to year in terms of that accounting. So the MD should comment on that. And then moving now to the recommended actions on page, actually, one more thought. Hazardous Substance Cleanup Program, MD should also comment on whether the Tome School Bainbridge Site Contamination Assessment Project is needed in Cecil County, given the fact that there's legislation that would push out the timeline in terms of the Tome School transfer to the state as part of the Port of Deposit Historical Park, and also because there's legislation in this session that would not include that transfer of the Tome School property and therefore seemingly not require the funding needed for the Hazardous Substance Cleanup Program. And unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Gray. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee for Mr. Gray? This afternoon, we have from the Maryland Department of Environment, the Secretary Serena McQuillan. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon, Chair Chang and all the members of the subcommittee. It's good to be here. Thank you for this opportunity to present our fiscal year 2026 capital budget. And for the record, again, I am Serena McElwain, Secretary of Maryland's Department of the Environment. Our budget request is $412 million. It's a slight decrease from this year, but it does remain focused on protecting Maryland's water quality, upgrading critical infrastructure, and ensuring resilience against climate-related challenges. As Maryland continues to grow, ensuring that we have sustainable capital funding sources will be critical for modernizing infrastructure, maintaining regulatory compliance, and meeting future water resource challenges, which results because of our issue with climate change and population growth as well, and contaminants of emerging concern, such as PFAS. Our budget prioritizes drinking water, wastewater upgrades, Chesapeake Bay restoration and flood protection and climate resilience, and nearly half of the funding will support overburdened and underserved communities. Roughly 2/3 of that funding would go to support wastewater infrastructure, modernization and expansion, and about 1/3 of it are for investments in drinking water infrastructure, so that we can get lead out, of course, and reduce PFAS and modernize aging systems. Together, these investments will save lives, make our economy stronger, create thousands of good-paying, family-supporting jobs, and build a sustainable Maryland that is resilient to natural disasters. I want to drill down just a little bit into what all of this really means in terms of just a few areas. We're getting the lead out. Maryland is making huge progress in completing our lead service line inventory, which is required by US EPA. Our initial inventory of 1.5 service line shows that 1 million are confirmed to be free of lead, which is of course good news. 500,000 of those lines we still need to inspect a little more to find out if they do have lead in them. And 3,000, they require replacement. We will leverage the $111 million in federal funds that are dedicated to replacing lead service lines, and we anticipate an additional $60 million. These resources won't really get us to the finish line, but they are an enormous down payment on our children's future, and we are working with local water systems to maximize every single dollar. Second, I want to talk about our investments to protect the Bay. We have made tremendous progress reducing wastewater pollution. This is in great part thanks to 2 decades and more than $2 billion of investment from the Bay Restoration Fund. We are all acutely aware of the failures of Back River and Patasko plants. which were really caused by aging infrastructure and deferred maintenance. These have now been fixed really for about a couple of years now. But their failures, they really do underscore the challenges that remain in the older systems, and we have them across the state. Over the last 20 years, we've upgraded 66 out of 67 major plants, and that is good news. But it also means that even though these plants have been upgraded, they're still getting old, and we still need to plan for future investment. In 2030, the Bay restoration fee will be cut in half, and that's going to impact the funding that we have for wastewater upgrades, for septic conversions, and stormwater projects as well. And I'm just raising it now because I think it is time for us at some point to start having those discussions on how do we sustain that funding past 2030 when the fund is cut in half. And again, we really do need that funding. I want to just talk quickly about PFAS, which is often called forever chemicals because we know that they stay in us forever. Maryland, we are a national leader when it comes to addressing these contaminants, which can cause cancer, heart disease, and developmental effects on our children and pregnant women too. So the work that we're doing will save lives, prevent thousands of avoidable illnesses, and protect critical sectors of our economy. We're making sure that drinking water systems meet the new federal limits, and we have secured $125 million in federal funds for water systems, particularly the ones that are at most risk. Additionally, no local jurisdictions applied for I just want to make sure I say that. None of them applied for the IIJA funding for PFAS projects this year, but it's not due to the lack of need. It's really because there's just so much more work to be done that those local jurisdictions need to look into and figure out. But we are proactively working with local jurisdictions so that we can prepare them for future funding opportunities. We're going to give them technical assistance if needed, but I did want to make that point. Water infrastructure includes, as we know, much more than just water and wastewater systems. It's also about flood control, climate adaptation, and natural infrastructure that keeps our communities safe and protects the environment. We are expanding Maryland's flood mitigation program with $14 million allocated to fiscal year 2026. Major projects in Baltimore City, Somerset, and Allegheny counties, just to name a few, will enhance resilience for vulnerable communities. And to make these dollars go even further, we are streamlining our permitting, and we're working with local governments so that we can improve, project readiness and execution. And as I conclude, I do want to underscore that while these programs and dollar figures can seem ambiguous, we're really talking about real dollars. These dollars are going to real communities throughout the state. We don't ask for this funding really for my agency, for MDE. It's really for you and for your constituents. In recent years, we've used funds from this capital budget to invest $200 million in WSSC's water biofuel reclamation project, and it added clean power back to the grid by us investing in this project. Of course, it reduces greenhouse gas emissions. We've also put $56 million into drinking water upgrades in Prince George's County, and another $50 million in sewer and non-point source projects in Prince George's County and Montgomery County. In Baltimore County, we also put $18 million into Patapsco Ditcher project and millions more in projects in even Anne Arundel County, Dorchester, Cecil, just to name a few. So again, this money is not for MDE, it's for all of your constituents, and communities. Our capital funding programs are critical for Maryland's water infrastructure, environmental protection, and public health. We are making those strategic adjustments so that we can maximize federal funding, ensure long-term revenue stability, and accelerate capital project implementation. We remain committed to leveraging state and federal resources efficiently, spending capital funds wisely, and ensuring long-term sustainability for our water infrastructure. I appreciate the time to speak, and I am open for any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee for the Secretary? Great, thank you. We have a couple witnesses who will be providing testimony in 2-minute time frame. We have Eric Galley with the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, and also Kim Coble with the Maryland League of Conservation Voters. Okay, that will conclude the hearing for Department of Environment. The committee will now move on to Department of Natural Resources, and our budget analyst is Andrew Gray.
Mr. Chair, I'll now present the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, or DNR's fiscal 2026 capital budget analysis. On page 1 there, you see that there are 11 programs reflected, only 9 of which are actually receiving funding in fiscal 2026. The critical maintenance program has sufficient funding through the Park System Critical Maintenance Fund that was provided through the Great Maryland Outdoors Act a couple years ago. And the Maryland Groundwater Monitoring Network is a new program that won't start until the 2030 in the 2025 Capital Improvement Program. In terms of the funding for the Program Open Space Land Acquisition and Local Program, there is no funding for state acquisition other than the Heritage Conservation Fund, $2.3 million, because the funding is going towards the Public Access Program and the Green Space Equity Program as well. Moving now to the recommended actions on page 2 and 3. The GLS recommends concurring with all of the authorizations and allowance. Exhibit 1 on page number 4 reflects kind of the big picture in terms of the funding over the time period, over 2030 time period. Basically, what you're seeing here is an increase in the transfer tax revenues estimated for the out years. There was a substantial decrease in transfer tax revenues in recent years, as shown in Exhibit 2 on page 5. That's largely due to reductions in revenue estimates and, probably even more importantly, the underattainment from prior years. So when you underattain revenues from a particular year, that impacts the revenues that you're available then 2 years later. It's truing up the budget in a sense. So it's an $85 million underattainment in fiscal 2024, which impacts fiscal 2026. As a result, there's $13 million less in funding for transfer tax programs in fiscal 2026. And then on the next page, so there's some information about the funding for programs traditionally funded with the transfer tax revenue and the decreases reflected for each of them. And finally, in terms of exhibits here, Exhibit 4 on page 7 shows the differences between fiscal 2025 allowance or fiscal 25 appropriation and fiscal 2026 allowance. And you see the largest reduction there is for the Program Open Space State and Local Program. There's a $1.6 million increase for oysters. Now, moving to the BRFA provisions that impact the Department of Natural Resources and have an impact here as well. Page 8, there are 3 components there. The program open space balance is being used for Maryland Park Service operating expenses, around $16.4 million. That means there's obviously less money available for, say, land purchasing. Waterway Improvement Fund support for the Natural Resources Police accounts for a $100,000 increase in funding from $2 million to $2.1 million in the BRFA. And the critical maintenance funding is transferred from the dedicated purpose account. So there was $25 million originally in that account. There was a transfer last year of $14 million, and then the $11 million is being transferred this year. So therefore, there will be no more money in the dedicated purpose account for critical maintenance program purposes. In terms of some of the comments, we've asked the agency to provide the Waterway Improvement Fund. This program starting on page 16. DLS is recommending that the agency comment on some of the information about how it's fiscal 2026 project list is accounting for the whole watershed fund work. That's chapters 55, 58, and 59 of 2024 that created the whole watershed partnership and fund. And it's not entirely clear which projects will be funded out of the Waterway Improvement Fund. It's one of the many sources of funding for that particular purpose. Then the other area I've asked the agency to comment is in terms of the oyster restoration program, which begins on page 19. Just one note there that there is an expansion from the 5 sanctuaries that we were planning on originally restoring to adding additional sanctuaries, which looks good, but then in 2030 is about a $10.2 million price tag in terms of adding Hooper Strait and Herring Bay. So that's certainly a concern in terms of the out years for the capital program. And there's also a question about how the agency in general will be able to fund the oyster restoration work it's doing based on the reliance on federal funding coming from National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and due to the kind of fluctuations at the federal level. And DNR should be prepared to comment on potential loss of federal funds and how that will impact them, what contingencies they have in place to deal with that particular concern. Also, DNR should comment on the outcome of the St. Mary's River Sanctuary's first 3-year monitoring that was scheduled for fall 2024, and comment on the long-term plan for oyster spat production and oyster substrate procurement to support the planned restoration work in the Hooper Strait Sanctuary and Herring Bay Sanctuary, given the constraints on oyster spat shell substrate to be put into the bay. The first and only issue in this analysis on page 22 and concerns the implementation of the Great Maryland Outdoors Act, Chapter 39 of 2022. A couple of bulleted points there in terms of things that we'd hope to have kind of moved forward on, but we have not seen as much progress. On page 23, DLS recommends that DNR comment on the next steps for completing those components and on what deadlines the General Assembly can hold DNR to account. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Gray. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee for Mr. Gray? Delegate Christ.
Mr. Chairman, just one question in regards to the BRFA and the program Open Space. I think during the Great Recession, didn't the state do something similar to them to help balance the budget? Then we had to pass a bill several years later to retroactively go back and repay program Open Space.
It was at a much higher level. Yes, it was around $1 billion transferred, but the majority of the funding was replaced over time. But yes, you're right that there was a repayment plan that had to be put in place.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. This afternoon we have from the Department of Natural Resources, the Secretary, Joshua Kurtz. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee, for the record, Josh Kurtz, Secretary, Department of Natural Resources. I'm joined by the Deputy Director of our Fiscal and Administrative Services, Ryan Collins, who can answer any technical questions. I wanted to start out by kind of encapsulating what you're seeing in our capital budget, and then I think really what it is kind of breaks into 2 spaces. Things we do in the water, around the water, to improve water quality, to make it a better place for boaters, to improve our fishing communities, and things that we do on the land. We're protecting land, we're restoring pieces of our land for a wide range of things: human health, habitat, as well as water quality. So we are focused on those 2 spaces, and our capital budget is really where we deliver those outcomes. Our capital budget goes to projects in communities all across the state to protect and preserve land, working with our local governments to help them protect, preserve, and then administer their lands, and then supports many of the large-scale restorations programs that we have and partnerships that we're a part of, including the Chesapeake Bay Restoration, which spans 6 states, the District of Columbia, and several other partners. So when we look at our capital budget for this year, there are a couple really exciting things I wanted to highlight. As we know, is that we are in a tough budget situation, and so there are a couple places where we were doing some things to, I believe, are innovative to try to help us think about our long-term sustainability of our budget. One of those I wanted to highlight is an acquisition, Savage River Lodge. It is going to be renamed the Savage Highland State Park. You are the first people to hear that. And this is a really interesting opportunity for us because this is an acquisition that has a revenue stream attached to it, which is an incredibly popular lodge. And so this will allow us to continue to acquire in this area while having basically a budget built in that would allow us to sustain the operations of that park. We also have some really interesting opportunities in Wycomico County, which just came to fruition, first state park in Wycomico County, and we're working on Baltimore City to close that gap and ensure that every one of our jurisdictions has a state park. That's a partnership park that was set up in legislation last year. We're working through that now. And then, when we look at what you maybe don't necessarily see in this budget, it's the hundreds of critical maintenance projects that we're doing across the state. I'll talk a little bit more about the GMOA implementation issues, but what we're doing with our budget there is small projects, you might think, but they are building roads, they're restoring bathrooms, they're making sure that our parks are accessible to everybody in the state of Maryland and all of our public land for fishing, hunting, recreation, a wide range of different things. I did want to get into some of the questions briefly that Mr. Gray brought up, starting with oysters. So as he mentioned, we have the 5 tributary scale restoration program that has gone on as part of the Bay Agreement. Question about St. Mary's. So that fund or that information was gathered in 2024, and what we're seeing is 11 of the 12 areas that were surveyed met the 2 minimum criteria, or the 2 high criteria for success in that space. So we are very confident that just like the other 4 large-scale restoration sanctuaries, this will meet the criteria that were sort of set forth ahead of time for success. Mr. Gray touched on the 3 potentially, I don't want to call them new sanctuaries because they are part of our sanctuary program already, but the 3 new areas for investment being the Nanaco, Cooper Strait, and Herring Bay. And we have secured NOAA funding, although, as Mr. Gray pointed out, that is in flux. So as we think about the future of these restoration sites, we're going to really be thinking about how does opportunities for aquaculture play a bigger role in this potentially if we don't have the federal dollars that we're looking to secure, to continue to have for this program. Mr. Gray also touched on the availability of spat and shell and substrate. So a couple really exciting things that have happened over the past year. One is the importation of West Coast shell. This is a really interesting opportunity for the state of Maryland, and we've worked closely with our commercial watermen to basically take a waste product from the western side of the U.S. It is biosafe, bring it to Maryland, and help that restore our eastern oyster. So we're just taking the shell, not the actual biological material, and so that is an opportunity for us to increase that spat. We are seeing incredible spat sets right now, so we need more hard surface to catch the spat set to really continue to benefit the oysters. Changing gears to Great Maryland Outdoors Act implementation. So what you see in this analysis, I would agree, is not fast enough implementation of Great Maryland Outdoors Act. And so we've made a couple changes internally at the department. We've stood up a procurement review group. We have a capital budget team that now meets twice a month. And what we're doing is working through a regional structure to get these projects in the ground. When we look at this fund right now, I think there's a couple places that we have chosen to prioritize and invest. And they really fit into 2 of the buckets, the climate resilience and adaptation bucket and the historical preservation bucket. We have just over $3.2 million on contract to do multiple projects across the state for historic preservation. And in the climate resilience bucket, we're working at Point Lookout State Park, Patapsco Valley, and the Hammerman area of Gunpowder to do resilience projects. Basically, what this is doing is reinforcing our infrastructure, ensuring that it's going to have the long-term sustainability so people can continue to use and love these spaces. And we're doing that by looking at future projections of increased precipitation, things like that. When you look at our critical maintenance bucket, a thank you to many of you for last year for increasing our procurement authority. We're able to move more of these projects through internal queues. We've been prioritizing some of these larger ticket items. So we have 26 projects that are currently in our queue to move forward. Now, 26 projects sounds like a lot, but they're actually only $3.6 million. So I think what that highlights is that these are not big dollar projects, but there's a lot of them spread throughout the state. So we're working to kind of do more procurement at scale, thinking about if we're going to do a paving of a road, let's pave 5, 6, 7 roads at the same time. So working with DGS to really try to knock out multiple projects at one time. And lastly, I just, it was touched on in here, the importance of federal funds across our department for implementation. We're working actively every day to talk with our federal partners to ensure that we know what's going on with those funding sources, whether that be NOAA or EPA. Many of our implementation funds are supported as match our state funds with federal dollars. So we are concerned about the leverage that's potentially going to be lost if these federal funds go away. Although our approach for continuing to do the work will be to lean on our special funds, which again go to creating benefit in communities across the state. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Secretary Kurtz. We have a question from Delegate Geist.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I asked basically the same line of questioning in regards to program open space. As you know, it's a trust fund. You know, it was established under the trust that, you know, that money is going to be spent in a certain way in a certain place. In fact, that's sort of where the legislature, when we passed the retroactive repayment legislation, that's the argument that was used to pass that. And here we are, we're going to go back and kind of revisit the same decision that we made during the Great Recession. So I guess my first question is, I guess the money that we're taking out of that program, what's it going to be used for? And then how will that void be left? I mean, what kind of projects are we not going to be able to fund now with it?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Delegate. And so the approach we're taking with this fund transfer is directly related to Great Maryland Outdoors Act. And so we brought on several new positions at the Park Service to ensure that we're able to provide that baseline to all members who visit our parks. And so this fund would be transferred so that we could continue to pay operating. We have an operating deficit in the Park Service right now. And so this would be a one-time opportunity for us to do that. We have a House Bill 717 that we're looking at a bunch of different options for us to have a long-term sustainable budget for the Park Service, including affiliated foundations and a couple other options. So this would still go directly to managing our public lands and our protected lands, but it would go to more of the operating side.
Fishing license fees, where will many of that money go to the capital budgets at all and operating as well?
So that budget is going to supporting all of the non-title fishing opportunities. So that would be our hatcheries, our stock trout program, all of the work that our team is doing to understand what's going on in our non-title spaces and any restoration that happens that results in increase in fishing populations.
So that money will be directly spent on fishing mostly, and it's, I guess, restocking, which is generally Western Maryland then.
Yes, we restock all across the state, but yeah, it's going to support a lot of the hatchery programs, but also some of our invasive species programs are based out of there as well. So all things that related to directly to impacts to those species that are, so beloved by our recreational anglers.
What types of species do you guys restock on the Eastern Shore?
On the Eastern Shore, I can follow up with that and let you know exactly what we're stocking. We have a list too, so I can send you the schedule for stocking as well.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the Secretary? Great, thank you very much. This afternoon, we have several witnesses who are providing testimony in the Department for Natural Resources. And I'll call them up, and then if each witness could provide testimony in 2-minute time frame. We have Catherine Laudar with the Baltimore Green Space Land Trust for Community Management Open Space Incorporated. We have Matt Stegman with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. We have Phineas DeFore with Bordy Vineyards. Ann Jones with Land Preservation Trust. And Lucille Walker with the Southern Maryland Heritage Area. If each of you could introduce yourselves and provide the testimony in 2 minutes, appreciate it. Thank you.
Certainly, I'll go first. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. For the record, my name is Owen Bailey. I am the co-chair of Partners for Open Space. In addition to the letter we submitted, I'm here to testify in support of the capital budget with full funding for the programs under the transfer tax. Better known as Program Open Space, it is the heart of land use and protecting and investing in lands that provide value for our state. Whether agriculture, forest, native habitat, historic site, or park space, this land provides tremendous value and returns on the investment in the form of food production, economic development, habitat preservation, modernization of our historical buildings and properties, and the telling of stories of our collective history. By protecting and enhancing these land uses, we are ensuring the realization of that land use value. We recognize the dire budget issues our great state is facing and the difficult task that you have ahead. Land conservation is about working together to ensure the future of our land use continues to provide that value for our well-being. The fact that Maryland has already reached 30% milestone 5 years ahead of schedule speaks volumes about the effectiveness of the program and the success of our conservation community. Reaching 40% by 2040 will require an even deeper commitment from the state. but will have the same returns on that investment. And in closing, I'll leave you with a quote from World Wildlife: "There is no viable global solution to the climate crisis without improving the way we use our lands." I urge full funding for the various programs under the transfer tax. Thank you.
First, I want to thank all of you for the work that you're doing and for having us here. I'm Katie Lauder. I'm the Executive Director of Baltimore Green Space. I am also a member of the Green Space Equity Program Advisory Board. And I am here today to support fully funding that program. So you have my written testimony. I want to also add a few points of information to that written testimony. As you know, this year was the first year that the Green Space Equity Program was funded and is operational. And in this first year, it received over 40 applications for $12 million of requests for a $5 million pot of funding. And then 36 of those applications were fully considered, representing 15 different counties and communities of overburdened and underserved areas. And in a time of climate change and in a time where the 30 by 30 certainly doesn't represent green spaces in urban communities, it is really important that this funding remain intact. For climate resilience reasons, for green space access reasons, for underserved communities to have experience nature generally. And so I would urge you to keep this funding in place, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the subcommittee. My name is Matt Stegman. I'm the Maryland staff attorney for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. It's a real pleasure to be back in the Appropriations Committee hearing room with you. We're here to support the capital budget as introduced by the governor for the Department of Natural Resources. DNR is really at the forefront of managing the state's restoration effort of the Chesapeake Bay, and the capital budget is one of the most powerful tools that they have for that effort. In particular, I want to say that we are very pleased to see funding for continuing our oyster tributary restoration programs, and to just ask the committee to please, in the spirit of the capital budget, to really view those investments in oysters as both a long-term investment that pays water quality dividends, but also a long-term commitment that requires sustained effort and investment if we're going to achieve the economy of scale that we want to see to really make a difference in water quality in the bay, and to avoid the costs that are incurred by mobilizing and demobilizing equipment. So it's something that requires a sustained effort, but it pays a sustained dividend, and thank you for your support.
Good afternoon, Delegate Chang and members of the committee. My name is Kristen Kirkwood. I'm the Executive Director of the Harford Land Trust in Harford County. I'm a coalition member of Partners for Open Space, and also I serve as the board chair of Forever Maryland, which represents the more than 20 land conservation nonprofits across the state. Local land trusts are valuable partners in the effort to reach the goal of preserving 40% of the state by 2040. We work hand in hand with local landowners in both rural and urban areas in all counties, using all of the invaluable programs funded by the transfer tax to help preserve the best of Maryland for the benefit of all. The land trusts represented by Forever Maryland are grateful for the current capital budget, and we recommend full funding for all of the program open space programs. We do recognize Maryland is in an extremely difficult financial situation, and as the appropriate question from Delegate Grist, we ask that any diversion of funds from the special fund of program open space from the transfer tax to any general fund be repaid per the prior legislation enacted in 2016. Successful land preservation relies on consistent available funding. Each program funded by the transfer tax is greatly oversubscribed with far more applicants than funds available. Any cuts to these programs in the long term will directly impact Maryland's goal of preserving 40% of our farms, forests, and open space, which we know are an extremely vital long-term investment in our economy, environment, and the quality of life we so enjoy here in Maryland. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee. My name is Bill Crouch, and I'm the Maryland State Director for the Conservation Fund, a national 501c3 nonprofit land trust. I'm here to advocate for a unique market-driven program open space that since 1969 has provided funding to protect and provide access to Maryland's abundant natural resources. The health and economic benefits of time in nature and visitation to public land cannot be disputed. We often lose sight of the economic benefits of land protection. According to the Maryland Outdoor Recreation Economic Commission report in 2019, the outdoor recreation industry in Maryland contributed $14 billion in spending, generated 109,000 direct jobs, and generated $951 million in state and local tax revenues. These lands are not just idle green spaces, they are great investments. Despite these health and economic benefits, HB 350 diverts $16.4 million from the state side of program open space. As an innovative, market-driven program, program open space adjusts to actual real estate market conditions. Diversions override this innovative feature and have an exacerbated effect. While we understand the significant nature of Maryland's current budget shortfall, it is imperative that the Department of Natural Resources maintain the ability to capitalize on outstanding and publicly accessible acquisition when those opportunities arise. The state side has also borne the brunt of previous funding diversions. Between 2002 and 2018, $600 million was diverted from the state side and not repaid. From a nationwide perspective, Maryland's program Open Space is envied as a visionary and innovative market-driven program. Please allow program Open Space to operate as intended. Thank you.
Thank you to the panel.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Ann Jones. I am with Land Preservation Trust, and I've had the privilege since about 1999 of administering the Rural Legacy area for the Piney Run Watershed Rural Legacy area. I know that this panel is bigger than some you've seen in other budgets that just came up today, but I think that speaks to the diversity of programs that are funded by the transfer tax. And I am here to speak purely about the Rural Legacy Program today. And I want to thank you and thank everybody for the current budget, the governor and the DLS recommendation that at this time includes full funding for the Rural Legacy Program. As was mentioned, just by both market considerations and the, I will say, shall we say, a little bit vague forecasting in the past, we're down by at least $85 million at the top of this before we even get out of the gate. We appreciate the fact that there need to be budget cuts throughout the state, and I do not envy you your job one little bit. But I think these programs have taken a large hit. When it has happened before, there has been a repayment provision. We will be looking at that. And I want to just hone in a little bit on something that I think is kind of interesting, and it has to do with the economic impact of when you preserve these areas. There tends to be a feeling that we've preserved it so it just sort of sits there under a glass bubble. But in reality, these are farms, these are areas that bring in tourism, these are areas that contribute to quality of life. And in the area where I work, there is a lot of agriculture. And to talk about how big this is on an international stage, unfortunately, when the accident happened to the Key Bridge, there were 148 containers of soybeans on that ship that came from the Lippy Brothers, which is a farm in Baltimore County in the area where we've done the Rural Legacy. And I only point that out to say this has international, protecting the land, protecting the waters, goes way beyond putting it under a glass dome. Appreciate your support and appreciate the ability to talk here today.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee for this panel witnesses? Okay, great, thank you. We also have listed Phineas DeFord with 40 Vineyards. and also Lucille Walker with the Southern Maryland Heritage Area.
I know she cannot be.
Yeah, Lucille Walker sends her regrets. She had an emergency.
Okay, thank you. And Phineas DeFord, Bordy Vineyards. Okay, great. That concludes the hearing for the Department of Natural Resources. The committee will now move on to the Department of Housing and Community Development, and our budget analyst is Scott Benson.
I jumped the gun, sorry. Very eager.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Today I'll be presenting the analysis for the Department of Housing and Community Development. The fiscal 2026 capital budget totals $389.3 million across 15 different programs. The Department of Housing and Community Development, or DHCD, uses its capital funding to create and preserve affordable rental housing, promote home ownership, improve energy efficiency for low-income households, and provide financial assistance for business and community development projects. Exhibit 1 on page 6 shows the proposed fiscal 2026 funding by category, with programs dedicated to community development occupying 33% of the budget, and rental housing and shelter programs comprising 32% of the budget. As you can see in Exhibit 2 on page 7, DHCD's capital budget decreases by 29% in fiscal 2026 compared to fiscal 2025. Significant changes include changes in housing and building energy programs, where there's an increase of $18.1 million, or 47%, to $56.5 million. Additionally, the Baltimore Regional Neighborhood Initiative, or BRNI, the fiscal 2026 budget includes $27 million, which is an increase of $6.4 million. The National Capital Strategic Economic Development Program, or NED, decreases by $7 million in fiscal 2026. While federal funds for broadband have expired, which really explains the difference between the fiscal 2025 and 2026 budget, as in fiscal 2025, the program received $172.7 million. In fiscal 2026, there is a new mandate. The Baltimore Vacants Reinvestment Initiative, or BVRI, formerly known as Project CORE, provides grant funding through public and nonprofit organizations to address vacant properties in Baltimore City. As mandated, the governor is required to include $50 million in pay-as-you-go or pay-go general funds in the fiscal 2026 budget for the program. But the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act of 2025 includes a provision that would remove restrictions and authorize the governor to include $50 million for the Continuing the Core Partnership Fund in either the capital or operating budget. To note, the Housing Innovation Fund. So Chapter 212 of 2024 established the Housing Innovation Fund, with the purpose being to support the Housing Innovation Pilot Program. Chapter 212 also authorized the governor to include an appropriation of $5 million to the new fund in fiscal 2025. The final fiscal 2025 capital budget included language restricting the use of $10 million from the rental housing program for the purposes of implementing Chapter 212. For fiscal 2025, an allocation to the fund must be committed to projects before July 1st, 2026, subject to applicants being afforded a reasonable period of time to complete the application. For fiscal 2026 and annually thereafter, an allocation to the fund in a fiscal year must be committed to projects before the end of that fiscal year. Additionally, regarding the State Small Business Credit Initiative, or SSBCI, this program funds state programs that expand access to capital for small and underserved businesses. The American Rescue Plan Act provided a total of $198.4 million to Maryland for the SSBCI, including $20.7 million set aside for businesses owned by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals, and $11 million that will become available to the state once Maryland has achieved performance standards related to assisting socially and economically disadvantaged individual-owned businesses. While DHCD is the lead agency for the state's SSBCI funding, the funding will also be deployed through programs at the Department of Commerce, the Maryland Technology Development Corporation, as shown in Exhibit 3. As of February 2025, DHCD, Commerce, and the Maryland Technology Development Corporation has awarded a combined total of $41.1 million in SSBCI funds. The Business of Facade Improvement Program was established by Chapter 437 of 2023 in order to provide grants to political subdivisions and community development organizations. Grants are able to be used to improve the outside appearance of businesses and other facilities. And this program was separated from the Division of Neighborhood Revitalization. And in fiscal 2022, DHCD had reported that the Division of Neighborhood Revitalization had provided between $3 and $4 million in facade improvements annually through these programs, such as Community Legacy Program and Bernie. The Downtown Partnership of Baltimore is also something to note. This is a nonprofit corporation that works with businesses and government entities to identify needs and shape policy in order to strengthen Baltimore City. Over fiscal 2024 and 2025, the state had provided the Downtown Partnership of Baltimore with a $23.5 million of direct funding through DHCD. This special funding arrangement was scheduled to end with the fiscal 2025 authorization. And as agreed, no funding has been provided in the fiscal 2026 budget for this purpose. However, the Downtown Partnership of Baltimore has indicated that it is using $7 million of the state funds for the construction of a strategic operations center. The fiscal 2026 budget provides an additional $5 million in GO bond funds for the center through a miscellaneous grant. Moving on to other observations. The first to note involves the rental housing funding, which is decreasing. Rental housing programs are used to rehabilitate and create new affordable housing for low to moderate income individuals, families, and elderly residents or special need populations. As you can see in Exhibit 4 on page 13, funding for rental housing programs has increased significantly over the past several years. Fiscal 2026 funding totals $113.5 million, which is a 3% decrease from fiscal 2025. Rental housing programs still have $33 million in unencumbered funds from fiscal 2021 to 2023, with $81.4 million yet to be expended. The largest component of DHCD's rental housing programs is Rental Housing Works, or RHW, which receives $85 million in GO bonds in fiscal 2026. RHW provides loans to both nonprofit and for-profit developers for projects. And you can see in Exhibit 5 on page 15, the funding provided through RHW by county since calendar 2012, as well as current pipeline for upcoming RHW projects. The RHW pipeline exceeds $280 million for projects to create or rehabilitate more than 10,000 housing units. The National Low Income Housing Coalition estimated a shortfall in Maryland of more than 134,000 units affordable for households below 30% of the AMI, based on 2022 data from the American Community Survey. The Baltimore Vacant Reinvestment Initiative, or BVRI, is funded through is part of the Strategic Demolition Fund, providing grants for demolition, land assembly, housing development, or redevelopment. And you can see in Exhibit 6, Baltimore City, as well as the number of new vacant building notices, demolitions, and rehabilitated vacant buildings. In total, there have been total vacant building notices have declined by 22% between calendar 2016 and 2024, with more than 3,600 demolitions and 9,900 rehabilitations taking place over this period. regarding Bernie provides a grant to fund revitalization in sustainable community areas, and funding is mandated at $12 million annually, while the fiscal 2026 budget includes $27 million in GO bonds, and the CIP plans $27 million annually. Moving on to the second observation, broadband. Chapter 74 of 2021 renamed the Office of Rural Broadband and DHCD to the Office of Statewide Broadband and expanded its responsibilities to include developing a statewide broadband plan, collecting and publishing data on broadband availability and speed, as well as furthering digital inclusion efforts. You can see in Exhibit 7 on page 17 the funding from all sources appropriated for broadband programs across DHCD's operating and capital budgets through the fiscal 2026 allowance, totaling more than $710 million. The capital component includes $267.7 million of federal funds from the IIJA BEAD program, as well as $95 million in fiscal 2024 and $172.7 million in fiscal 2025. Exhibit 8 on page 18 shows the funding awarded or expended under each capital project, as well as remaining allocated funds between fiscal 2021 and 2026. And those projects include the broadband IIJA capital, local government infrastructure financing, broadband connectiveness, network infrastructure, and municipal broadband. The last observation note regards legislative reservations. The fiscal 2025 capital budget saw funds provided to projects in the form of GO bonds being taken and reserved for certain purposes. You can see in Exhibit 9, the fiscal 2025 budget saw several of DHCD's capital programs having funds restricted for uses specifically established in Chapter 720 of 2024. Out of $69.5 million in GO bond funds in the fiscal 2025 capital budget for Bernie, Ned, and the Strategic Demolition Fund, about $26.5 million, or 38%, were reserved for a specific purpose. A few performance measures and outputs. First to discuss is homeownership programs, which one of DHCD's main objectives is to help low and moderate income residents purchase homes. Exhibit 10 on page 20 shows activity in the programs increased substantially from fiscal 2015 through 2024. And the second performance regards bond issuances. And in addition to DHCD's array of budgeted programs, the department also includes the Community Development Administration, or CDA, which issues non-tax supported debt with the goal of increasing the supply of affordable housing in the state. CDA's issued $1.5 billion in single-family, multifamily, and local government infrastructure bonds in calendar 2024, which was a decrease from the record high of $1.6 billion in calendar 2023. And with that, we move to the recommended actions. There's one PAYGO recommended action, and DLS recommends deleting $50 million in general funds for the Baltimore Vacants Reinvestment Initiative. And there's three GO bond recommended actions, where DLS recommends funding the Baltimore Regional Neighborhood Initiative at mandated levels, eliminating funding for the Business Facade Improvement Program, and authorizing the C Community Development Anchor Institution Fund to fund the Downtown Partnership of Baltimore Strategic Operations Center. And that concludes my presentation. I am happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Benson. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee for Mr. Benson? This afternoon, we have from the Department of Housing Community Development, Secretary Jake Day. Thank you.
Chair Chang, members, good afternoon. Good to be with you. Start off by saying for the record, my name is Jake Day, Secretary of the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. Let it never be said that I stepped on Mr. Benson's toes. I just was eager to get up here. To my left is Assistant Secretary Carol Gilbert, who oversees the Neighborhood Revitalization Division of DHCD, and to my right is Assistant Secretary Greg Hare, who oversees the Community Development Administration within DHCD. So I am looking looking forward to discussing some of the finer points of DHCD's proposed fiscal year 2026 capital budget. Just want to say thank you again to Scott Benson and the Department of Legislative Services for their diligent work and thorough analysis of the budget. Governor Moore has introduced a common sense budget guided by a commitment to growth and dedication to helping Maryland emerge stronger from one of the worst fiscal crises in 2 decades. We've worked in partnership at Department of Housing and Community Development with many other agencies and community partners to make Maryland more affordable while driving economic growth, strengthening communities all across the state. And that's why I want to highlight a few of our responses to recommendations regarding our critical economic development programs that the governor's proposed funding at sustainable levels. First, we agree with DLS's recommendation to swap $50 million in general funds for the Baltimore Vacancy Reinvestment Initiative under the Strategic Demolition Fund with general obligation bonds. In response to DLS's recommendation to reduce the $27 million allowance for Bernie or the Baltimore Regional Neighborhoods Initiative by $15 million, DHCD respectfully disagrees. A $15 million additional investment doesn't just stay in Baltimore, it multiplies all across our state and our economy. That amount represents over $121 million in additional economic impact and returns of $5 million in direct state and local tax revenue. Next, we respectfully disagree with DLS's recommendation to eliminate funding for the Business Facade Improvement Program established by the leadership of Speaker Adrian Jones in 2023. DLS's suggestion that facade improvements be handled through other programs overlooks the core purpose of the program's establishment. The Maryland Facade Improvement Program, or MFIP as we colloquially refer to it, is a vital component to DHCD's revitalization toolkit, and it's allowed larger programs like Community Legacy, Bernie, and NED to focus on more expansive interventions within the jurisdictions that are applicable. Returning to the old system would revert to a more oversubscribed, underdeveloped revitalization strategy and would abandon significant progress made in expanding our well-rounded suite of resources. MFIP transforms vacant facades into revenue-generating assets for the state. Last year's $5 million in MFIP supported 426 facade projects all across the state, main streets and commercial corridors. It directly enhanced business districts, attracting businesses and increasing tax revenue. Lastly, we respectfully disagree with the recommendation to fund the Downtown Partnership of Baltimore Strategic Operations Center through the SEED program. The department is incredibly supportive of this project, as funded in the governor's proposed budget. However, we respectfully disagree that SEED or any other state revitalization program is the appropriate source of funding for the project. A project of this size and scale deserves budget consideration, just not at the expense of SEED or any other SRP. The proven most effective way to deploy limited state dollars into community projects is through a competitive review process where the department and other agencies objectively assess each project's need, impact, and readiness. The $5 million is also out of scale and inappropriate for the program that's become a key statewide tool for forging mutually beneficial partnerships between anchor institutions and their surrounding communities. The recommendation would effectively cut in half the SEED budget, limiting its ability to address high-demand statewide projects. Demand for SEED funding greatly exceeds available funds, like many of our programs. In FY25, DHCD received $40 million in statewide requests for the available $10 million. Last fiscal year, the average SEED award was only $420,000. Reducing SEED funding to $5 million would come at an opportunity cost with an economic price tag of $40.5 million to the state. In a fiscally tight year, Governor Moore has prioritized strategic investments with high returns and entrusted DHCD with achieving them, because you can't reap what you don't sow. Our written testimony provides a number of other responses and more information about our program's impact and our their continued demand, as well as our responses to recommendations and requests for additional information. That said, Assistant Secretary Gilbert, Assistant Secretary Hare, and I are here for any questions you have and looking forward to the discussion. Mr. Chair, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Any questions? Doggett Metzger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary Day, for being here with your team.
Yes,
and I have to concur with you that I believe the business facade building program is very good. In my town of Essex, I've seen it firsthand being used with your assistance, so I've seen it. Question I have is on the back on page 22 and 23, talks about the grant and loan program descriptions. Question I have, is that for individuals or is it for corporations only, or how does, in other words, can anybody apply for these kind of things?
Excellent question, Mr. Delegate, and thank you for encouraging those projects to apply for the MFIP program within your district. We are always looking to support those revitalization efforts. So some of these programs are, the answer depends on the program. So some of these programs are eligible for municipal and county applicants only. Others, community development corporations only, such as Bernie, the Baltimore Regional Neighborhoods Initiative. Others are eligible for anchor institutions to apply, higher education and healthcare, and some it's a mix. And so specifically, I don't know, Greg or Carol, if you want to add any color to that, but I think that's, we can go line by line, and we've also got a chart, a really helpful slide that we could share with the committee if that was of value.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
I appreciate that. If you'll send that to me or to the committee.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the secretary? Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you.
We have several witnesses who are providing testimony for the Department of Housing and Community Development of Claudia Wilson, the Community Development and Network of Maryland. We have Milana Vayner with Baltimore County DHCD. We have William Moore with Southbury Builders Incorporated, Stephanie Prostel with Housing Initiative Partnership, Thomas Seid with the Green Street Housing, Mary Claire Davis with ASC Greater Baltimore, and Brian Alston with the Park Heights Renaissance.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Chang and members of the House Capital Subcommittee. My name is Claudia Wilson Randall. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Development Network of Maryland. The Community Development Network is the voice for the community development sector, representing nearly 200 member organizations across who are involved in affordable housing development, housing counseling, and community-based nonprofits across the state. I want to speak strongly in favor of the capital budget for the Department of Housing and Community Development and thank the department for their commitment to the organizations within our network. Without the department, our organizations, none of our organizations can do the work that they do in community revitalization. I also want to just recognize the staff at DHCD for their commitment to the organizations and to the field and practice of community development overall. I do share, you have my written testimony today, but I do want to share some of the concerns that the department raised about the facade improvement program and the efficacy of that program, as well as concerns about the SEED program, which is essentially funding for anchor institutions to partner in community development. And that has been at $10 million, and I hope it remains at $10 million. I would hate to see $5 million go to one particular organization within Baltimore. I think that the department has shown outstanding consideration of projects, and I would hope that the downtown partnership would go through vetting with the department as well. My most important message today is that organizations cannot move capital without operating funds, so it's really important that we have corresponding operating dollars to go with the $27 million at Bernie and the $12 million in NED funding. And I also want to just stress the need for foreclosure prevention funds, as foreclosures are increasing in the state of Maryland. And it will be really important, as there is very little affordable housing available, that we are able to keep people in the houses that they're in today and prevent people from losing their homes to foreclosure. So with that, I will close my comment, and thank you so much for hearing me today.
Sorry, good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair and ladies and gentlemen of the committee. My name is Willie Moore. I'm president of Southway Builders. Our first project, we're a Baltimore City-based general contractor. Our first project was in 1991, and it was a low-income housing tax credit project. We've been doing LIHTC deals every year since our inception, and in our 34 years of business, we've built over 10,000 affordable rental and for sale units in the state. As our governor has so rightly noted, our current fiscal woes for the state need to be solved by growth. That's growth through business, and it's very hard to attract businesses to the state when we have a housing problem. We currently have a need for over 100,000 affordable housing units, and with DHCD's current request of rental housing works in the sum of $85 million, that will facilitate between 24 to 25 projects, with an average of 115 units per project for a total of approximately 3,000 units. The number one reason why projects do not advance is because the costs are too high. We're in a unique spot in time right now. Since 2020, prices have increased anywhere between 25 and 40%. Rental housing works has been one of the most valuable tools to bridge the cost gaps and ensure that much needed projects and housing can proceed. At an average of 377 jobs per project, the 24 projects that Rental Housing Works would fund will represent a little over 9,500 jobs for the state. And it's important to note that experientially, most all of those jobs are state residents. So I really appreciate your support. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Chair Chang and the members of the committee. My name is Stephanie Prestel, and I'm the Executive Director of Housing Initiative Partnership, HIP for short, Housing is HIP. We're a nonprofit affordable housing developer and counseling agency based in Prince George's County. We've been serving the community for 35 years, and in that time, we've provided housing counseling services to over 30,000 residents. We've developed over 500 units of affordable rental housing and 120 single-family homes for home ownership. We had someone from DHCD at one of our ribbon cuttings years ago, and they commented on how we used every program out there that they had. And I say that because housing is hard to develop. We need every tool in the toolbox to make it happen. We use private funds, we use our local county funds, and the state provides a critical match that we need to fill the gap to get these projects done. HIP is a multifamily developer, so similarly, we just completed a project in Prince George's County, 90 units of affordable senior housing, beautiful project. $3.5 million from the state leveraged $26 million to create 90 beautiful affordable senior community for our seniors. This is incredibly important money. That's the Rental Housing Works program that we really need you to fund. On the community development side, we're a big user of the NED funds. So we've used over $1 million to develop in communities like Fairmont Heights and Palmer Park and Kentland to buy and rehab single-family homes that we sell to first-time home buyers. We have community microgrid that we're putting in, so that's an exciting project. We have done pocket parks. We have removed vacant homes from our communities. These are critical funds that are so important for the state to invest in, and we urge you to continue to support the budget as it is. Thank you. There you go.
Good afternoon, Chair Chang, honorable members of the subcommittee. My name is Milana Vayner. I am the Chief of Policy and Strategic Initiatives at Baltimore County, DHCD, and I am also a member of the Maryland Affordable Housing Coalition Board as the local government representative. I'm here today to testify in support of the proposed DHCD capital budget and implore you, despite the many competing budget priorities before you, to maintain it as is. Creation of housing across all income bands is critical to economic growth and community vitality. I won't rehash all the many costs that have skyrocketed over the last 4 years and have made it increasingly difficult for projects to pencil. Money just does not go as far as it used to. However, it is especially dire for the families who seek better opportunities for themselves and their children. Study after study has proven that where a child grows up determines their long-term outcomes and their success as an adult and their future earning power more than any other external factor. Creating affordability in housing is an economic decision as much as it is a values decision. Yet, in Baltimore County, to afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment, which costs a little under $2,000 a month, a family has to earn over $37 an hour, nearly $78,000 a year. How can families ever save enough to buy a home when they can barely afford rent? There are over 50 LIHTC funded projects in service in Baltimore County, totaling over 4,700 units. Over the years, some of the projects have been the beneficiaries of various grants and loan programs, including Rental Housing Works, Community Legacy, Strategic Demolition, making them feasible in the short and long term. This doesn't include 4 current LIHTC projects that haven't even closed yet in Baltimore County. We cannot build a future we all wish for our residents and their families without this funding. There are difficult budget decisions ahead, but cutting this capital budget during an unprecedented housing affordability crisis will only exacerbate it. We have made so much progress. We cannot lose steam now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to the panel. Are there any questions? Delegate Metzger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You Southway Builders, you caught my attention, and Prince George's County caught my attention as well. You built a 90-unit for $3.5 million?
That was the Rental Housing Works loan. No, it was a $26 million.
Okay, you've had me thinking, what?
Yeah, I wish.
So just out of curiosity, what would it cost to build from ground up? Let me say this. I'm in a community where people call me all the time. I got just yesterday, a gentleman called me. He got 7 acres of property with a closed VFW up, and they want to sell it. And they want $1.7 million. And he said, you know, it'd be a great place for senior housing or whatever. And my mind went wild. And then just about an hour later, a lady called me and said, Rick, I've got my church up for sale. It's got 2.5, almost 3 acres of property in the prime of real estate. So my thought was, we need to develop this into 3 tiers: seniors, veterans, and families. And I'm thinking where we could go with this, and my mind's wandering, so that's kind of why I'm asking. What does it cost to build per unit today?
I'll let the contractor take that one.
That is a difficult thing to answer because there are so many variables. One of the biggest variables is your site. And if you imagine anything from hilly sites to the access of public utilities, so whether it's stormwater, sewer, to your electric utilities, any of that can add significant costs. But and this is a wild ballpark, you can go from $220,000 to $300,000 per unit, just as a very rough ballpark. I know the folks that are sitting behind me would be very anxious to help you and your constituents in their efforts to build more affordable housing.
Right. Well, we'll visit offline, but I appreciate it because
sure. Thank you.
I love our seniors and I love our veterans. We got to take care of them.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Delegate Metzger. And any other questions? Thank you very much, panel, for being here. We also have Thomas Aide with the Green Street Housing, or Mary Claire Davis with AHC Greater Baltimore, Brian Alston with Park Heights Renaissance, and Patrick Stewart with Penrose.
Good afternoon, Chair Chang and members of the committee. My name is Mary Claire Davis. I am Director of AHC Greater Baltimore. We are a nonprofit developer active in Maryland for more than 20 years. I'm here today to support the DHCD capital budget as presented by the governor. More specifically, we support the proposed funding of Rental Housing Works in the amount of $85 million as part of the rental housing programs. While a $25 million reduction in funding from last year is less than ideal, since there is a pipeline of projects that could support more than 3 times that amount of funding, we acknowledge that the state faces significant budget challenge this year, and we agree we must all work together to resolve it. We ask for no further cuts to rental housing programs since, according to recent polling, affordable housing is Marylanders' #1 issue of concern. Today, there are more development projects across the state waiting and ready to use rental housing works than the proposed amount can fund. Prioritizing the creation and preservation of affordable housing options not only helps our neighbors with their cost of living, but stable housing also means better educational and health outcomes for families and seniors and individuals with special needs. Thank you for allowing me the time and your continued support of solutions to Maryland's pressing housing needs.
Chair Chang, members of the committee, my name is Tom Aid. I'm the CEO of Green Street Housing. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of full funding for DHCD's rental housing programs. Green Street Housing relies on these programs to develop and rehabilitate high-quality, affordable housing for Maryland residents. Through DHCD funding, we've been able to construct and rehabilitate vital housing projects across the state. Right now, our pipeline of projects under development and under construction includes 16 projects across Queen Anne's, St. Mary's, Wycomico, Dorchester, Caroline, Anne Arundel, Calvert, Prince George's, Washington, and Montgomery counties, bringing over 1,000 units of much-needed affordable housing to these communities. In recent years, we've also completed projects in Somerset, Cecil, Kent, and Harford counties. Every one of these projects depends on DHCD's rental housing programs. These investments are more than just housing. They create jobs, generate tax revenue, and leverage private investment to maximize the state's impact. Without full funding for these programs, projects like ours, which provide safe and affordable housing for working families, seniors, and vulnerable populations, would not be possible. I urge you to fully fund DHCD's rental housing programs so that we can continue this essential work. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Brian Alston, State Circle Strategies, here on behalf of Park Heights Renaissance. You have our written testimony. We are here in strong support of DHCD's total budget request. Our urban renewal efforts aim to improve the quality of life in the neighborhoods of Park Heights Master Plan. It includes initiatives like employment training, housing stabilization, and commercial revitalization. DHCD has been a strong partner in our efforts, and we thank Secretary Day and his staff for his support. For example, funding from DHCD has enabled us to provide vital capital improvements to stabilize and retain existing homes, ensuring families have safe and stable and healthy living environments. These investments in home ownership are essential to building strong, resilient communities and providing families with the foundation they need to thrive. We respectfully disagree with DLS recommendation to eliminate the facade improvement program. DHCD's funding has supported our commercial revitalization efforts, specifically through facade improvements. These investments not only enhance the visual appeal of our community, but also contribute to the economic vitality and safety of local businesses, providing them with the tools they need to thrive and to create job opportunities for our residents. We know this is a challenging financial time. We ask for your continued support of DHCD during this challenging fiscal time. Thank you for your consideration of my testimony.
Good afternoon. Members of the subcommittee, Chair Chang, my name is Patrick Stewart. I'm the Regional Vice President with Penrose. We are a developer and manager of primarily affordable rental housing. I'm also a member of the Maryland Affordable Housing Coalition Board of Directors. So we all know about the direct impact rental housing funds have in preserving and creating affordable housing for working families, seniors, vulnerable populations like people experiencing homelessness, people with disabilities, veterans, and on and on. Today, I want to focus a little bit on the economic impact that these rental housing programs have. Simply put, we cannot grow our economy without providing more affordable housing for workers. That requires continuing our investments in DHCD's rental housing programs, fully funding DHCD's current capital budget request. Maryland is 7th highest in cost of living nationally. We've experienced 8 times lower economic growth than the nation as a whole, and those two facts are directly linked. We rank 42nd out of 50 states in terms of housing permits issued per capita, and we already need over 130,000 more housing units just to meet current demand. So we are not producing enough housing. By the way, I'm grabbing these facts from Comptroller Learman's report. I didn't do most of this research myself, but so understandably, for all those reasons, housing is #1 issue of concern for voters, according to a recent Maryland Realtors poll. The cost of housing is the top factor influencing where people decide to live or to move to, and housing affordability is also cited by the business community as a top indicator of Maryland's ability to compete economically. A stable workforce requires workforce housing. All these dots are connected. All arrows point to the importance of increasing housing supply, and so we need to double down on our efforts to increase housing supply. We need to build and preserve more housing units. And in order to do that, we need to invest in DHCD's rental housing programs. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to the panel. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee for the panel? Thank you very much. That concludes the hearing for the Department of Housing and Community Development. The committee will now move on to the Maryland State Library Agency, and our analyst is Ms. Nathalia Andrade.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. I am Natalie Andrade, here with the Department of Legislative Services to present the fiscal 26 capital allowance for the Maryland State Library Agency. On page 1 of the analysis, you can see that the fiscal 26 budget meets the statutory $7.5 million allocation for library projects, aligning with the 5-year capital improvement program. Unlike previous years, when funding exceeded this mandate, the governor's budget now adheres to the requirement. The fiscal 26 funds support 9 projects across 9 jurisdictions, covering new construction, expansions, renovations, ADA compliance, HVAC replacements, energy efficiency upgrades, security improvement, and technology and youth services space. Exhibit 1 on pages 3 to 5 shows library funding in the governor's budget as introduced. The governor's proposed budget includes library project grants ranging from $20,000 to $2.9 million, with a total estimated project cost of $84.6 million, including $12.2 million from prior authorizations. 3 projects have received prior funding, while 6 are newly funded for fiscal 26. Additionally, $20.2 million in future funding requests are anticipated to complete 6 projects. Rather than indicating a need for supplemental funding, this reflects how the program has exceeded its mandated levels in fiscal 24 and 25. If these future requests proceed, they could consume 90% of planned funding for fiscal 27 and fiscal 29, limiting new project funding. While MSLA has discretion in awarding grants, these commitments create expectations of continued state support, potentially constraining future funding availability. Given the current fiscal climate, MSLA should comment on how it plans to manage funding within the mandate and prioritize new requests without exceeding the program's intended limits. On pages 6 and 7, Exhibit 2 provides an update as of February 2025 on the status of construction and renovation projects funded in fiscal 24. As of fiscal 25, no progress has been made on projects to date. The status of capital grant projects funded in fiscal 24 varies across library systems. Several projects have been completed while others remain under construction, in the design phase, or have had funding adjustments. Update number 2 on page 8 discusses the expiration of state share adjustments. Chapter 362 of 2022 temporarily increased the state share of county library capital projects to assist fiscally constrained jurisdictions, but this provision will expire on June 30, 2025. Garrett County was the only jurisdiction eligible using Allegheny County's lower local match requirement to secure funding under the Public Library Capital Grant Program. This allowed Garrett County to receive funding for multiple years, including a proposed $1.1 million award for the Friendsville branch in fiscal 2026. The Board of Public Works has approved previous grants, and final approval for the fiscal 26 award is expected before the provision ends. And to conclude, the DLS recommended action is to approve the general obligation bond authorization for the Public Library Capital Grant Program. And with that, I conclude my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Andrade, for the presentation. Are there any questions for Ms. Andrade? Okay, great. This afternoon, we have the State Librarian Morgan L. Miller.
Good afternoon, Chair Chang and members of the committee. I want to thank our analyst, Natalie Andrade, for her excellent work on this, and also our DBM capital budget analyst, David Konigsberg, who is with us here today, who's just done an outstanding job in working with us to develop the program for FY26. With me, I have Mary Ramey, who oversees many of the grants that our agency administers and participates in the State Library Capital Grant Program Administration, as well as some other members of the agency staff and some members of our public library community whose projects are in the proposed list this year. So speaking on behalf of the Maryland library community, I want to begin by thanking you for your ongoing commitment to developing our public library facilities in Maryland. With the proposed FY26 funding for the construction of Garrett County's Friendsville Library, we will now have supported projects in all 24 Maryland counties. As you heard from our colleagues in housing, a public building like this gets funded through a variety of mechanisms with local county funding, some private fundraising, but it's truly the state grant funding through this program that is often the catalyst that gets the project off the ground. Since this program's creation in 2008, the state's $101 million investment has generated more than $380 million in local matching funds and supported a wide range of projects, from new roofs and HVAC systems to renovations and expansions, and something I think we should all be very proud about, 21 new libraries in Maryland. Again, it's the state funding that spurs these significant local investments in advancing much needed and heavily relied upon community infrastructure that are public libraries. I want to thank this subcommittee and the General Assembly for the support of the program thus far, and I think we can all be very proud of what it's accomplished. As you'll see in my written testimony in response to the DLS analysis, this year's proposed program highlights 9 projects in geographically diverse communities throughout the state and encompasses infrastructure replacements, renovations and expansions, and I am most excited to share 3 new libraries in communities that are growing and have never had a library in them before. I also want to respond to some of the challenges of the program as I answer the DLS response for comment about how we're going to manage with the limited funding of the program to meet these tremendous statewide needs going forward. Every year, we conduct a statewide library facility assessment in which all counties project their capital needs, large and small, over the next 5 years. This helps us to plan and to advocate for the program. The most recent assessment, which was completed at the end of calendar year 2024, indicates that 123 of the 192 public library buildings in Maryland are over 25 years old. And once you hit 25, there are some consequences of aging infrastructure, more so in buildings than in people. 20 buildings need a new roof. 17 facilities require alterations for ADA ADA compliance. 53 libraries have HVAC systems that are at the end of their useful life. 50 buildings require technological upgrades in order to provide access to high-speed internet, plug-in areas, and other modern services you would find in a library. 69 existing facilities require general renovation at an estimated cost of about $133 million, and 18 buildings have been identified for replacement with a new structure at an estimated cost of $495 million. This doesn't include any of the critical improvements to library facilities in Baltimore City or the $337.5 million needed to address all necessary repairs within the Enoch Pratt Free Library System as outlined in the 2024 Joint Chairman's Report. We recently received letters of intent from the county library systems for consideration for the FY27 capital grant cycle. And in total already, they exceed $21 million, which is almost 3 times what is allocated for this program. This is not a new trend. Consistently over the past several years, requests have exceeded the program's funding level, especially as we've come out of the pandemic. We are extremely grateful to the General Assembly's decision to increase the funding mandate for the program from $5 million to $7.5 million in FY23, which has really helped us to catch up with construction escalation. However, future funding requests for urgent and necessary projects will continue to exceed the mandated amount because the statewide need for library facilities is just tremendous. To address this, we've worked with DBM and the legislature to request additional program funds through the supplemental budget, and we've been successful during years when those funds were available, though this year, understandably, they're not. We've worked within the program through its competitive grant review process to make sure that funds are distributed equitably throughout the state to projects that will have the greatest impact on all of Maryland's citizens. The only alternative we have is to hold off on funding, but this approach generally proves more costly in the long run. As the new state librarian, I stepped into the role over the summer. I've had some very generative conversations at the federal level around potentially creating designated federal funding for state library capital projects. And he just left, but I've had some really great conversations with Secretary Day and his team at the Department of Housing and Community Development to explore how we might work together to bring funding to projects where libraries are co-located with other community resources. And you briefly heard of one of those in Park Heights, which is one of the projects in our capital grant cycle this year. But at the end of the day, I'll tee up, it's a future increase to the state mandate to align with the demand from the counties that is necessary for us to accommodate all of the requests throughout the state. But we can certainly have that conversation in another year, or a few years rather. This is one of the most valuable and impactful programs that we as the state agency deliver to the counties. The 21 new libraries I mentioned, including the new library that we opened in Cecil County in Northeast when I was the director there, would not be standing, any of them, without this. With your ongoing support for the FY26 program, and hopefully in the future as the state's fiscal outlook improves, Maryland libraries can remain responsive to community needs and thrive in safe, modern facilities that meet the multitude of needs brought to us by our communities. So thank you for your time here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Ms. Miller. Are there any questions? Delegate Metzger.
Yeah, I just have one question. I'm looking on the new libraries and so forth, and I know that Essex has put in for a new library, and I don't see it on the list, and Middle River is also put in for a new library. I don't see it on the funding list. Is that on the back burner now, or what's the?
Essex didn't apply for the capital grant program. They aren't required to. I think, is the Essex program, is that a joint, or Randallstown, that's one where they're doing a joint project with some other co-located resources.
So Essex did not put in for the grant?
I don't believe so. Yeah. Okay. No, I do know, just looking prospectively at FY27, they have put in for Woodlawn.
Okay.
And what was the, Delegate, what was the other?
Middle River.
Middle River?
Yeah.
I haven't seen that one in here yet either.
We were just talking about it the other day. So
sure. I'll keep an eye out for it.
Thank you. I want library money.
Me too.
Great, thanks, Delegate Metzger. And any other questions? Thank you very much. That concludes the hearing for the Maryland State Library Agency. The committee will now move on to Department of General Services, and our budget analyst is Madeline Miller.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Chang and committee. My name is Madeline Miller, and today I'll be presenting the analysis of the Juvenile Services capital budget. The DJS capital program is most often used to address the facilities in which its youth live. The performance measures section of this analysis will discuss the department's secure detention and secure committed populations. Detained average daily population, or ADP, consists of the secure detention predisposition population, the secured pending placement population, and the adult court authorized detention population. Since overall complaints rose approximately 75% between fiscal 21 and 23, and the courts have been fully operational post-pandemic, the detained average daily population rose to 264 youths in fiscal 24, as seen in Exhibit 1 on page 4. The ADP is expected to decrease slightly in fiscal 25 to 261 youths, as fewer complaints receive formal case dispositions. The overall ADP in fiscal 24 and 25 is higher than in fiscal 2020, but lower than in fiscal 2019, the last year of data not impacted by the pandemic. Based on the fiscal 25 year-to-date data, the adult court population now accounts for approximately 62% of the detained population, the highest proportion since DJS assumed responsibility for this population in fiscal 2014. Exhibit 2 on page 5 compares the rated capacity of detention facilities to its fiscal 24 ADP. Overall, the fiscal 24 detention ADP of 264 is 42 youths below the department's rated capacity of 306 youths at the start of the fiscal year. The department's detention facilities operated at a capacity ranging from 77.1% at the Baltimore City Juvenile Justice Center to 96.1% at the Western Maryland Children's Center. The WMCC became a girls-only facility in October of 2023. Up to 6 female youth may also be placed at the Lower Eastern Shore Children's Center. Remaining detention bed capacity is designated for male youth. I'll now turn to discussion of the committed populations. Since fiscal 23, the most commonly used post-court treatment program for DJS youth was a state-operated placement, though DJS may also contract with private, in-state, and out-of-state vendors to provide services. Exhibit 3 on page 6 shows the committed residential ADP for each of the possible committed placement types. The committed population rose by 11.2% in fiscal 24 compared with the prior year, with almost all of the growth coming from placements in state-operated facilities. Per diem placements are programs operated by private providers, and the state pays only the days that the youth is placed in the program. Since fiscal 2015, the private per diem ADP has fallen by approximately 78%. The out-of-state ADP decreased by approximately 28% from fiscal 23 to 24. State-operated placements saw a 16.7% increase in fiscal 24, with the ADP of youths rising from 67 to 78. Even as the average daily population rises to 84 in fiscal 24 year-to-date data, the utilization of state-operated placements remain approximately 30% lower than it was in fiscal 2019. A comparison of the total space and the ADP usage is provided in Exhibit 4 on page 7. DJS has fewer youth in committed treatment centers now, but fewer treatment centers are open than were in fiscal 2019. The first and only issue begins on page 8 and relates to the department's recently submitted facilities master plan. This document contains information about the current and planned capacity of DJS residential programs, a funding proposal for the Maryland Youth Residence Center, which would increase the hardware secure committed treatment space in the state, institutional data about the buildings and sites managed by the department, and inventory information. Though the department only has one capital project, the operating budget will be used to support its facility needs as well. It plans to use current and future operating budgets to support costs like HVACs, roof, chiller, generator, boilers, a gatehouse, master control room, and educational trailers, as well as fencing at facilities like Backbone Mountain Youth Center, BCJJC, Hickey, the Victor Collins Center, and at WMCC. Department also plans to use its operating budget funds to support certain technological costs that are critical to facility operations. In its testimony today, the department should comment on what planned projects in the facilities master plan may be eligible for the DGS facility renewal program. Facility utilization rates for the detained and committed populations are shown in Exhibit 5 on page 9. In the facility master plan, the department projects that its current detention capacity of 282 beds for male youth and 24 beds for female youth will remain adequate over the next decade due to the overall decline in juvenile crime, the use of detention alternatives, and other work by the department. The fiscal 24 detained youth average daily population of 264 represented approximately 86% of the total bed space within DJS detention facilities. Committed treatment space was similarly utilized in fiscal 24 with a utilization rate of 86%. In fiscal 25 year-to-date data, however, the utilization rate increases to approximately 93%. In the facility master plan, the department projects that its current committed treatment capacity of 85 beds for male youth and 6 beds for female youth is inadequate, and that the MYRC project should be added to increase the total committed capacity for male youth. The available capacities within the detention and committed treatment facilities are connected through the population of youth that is in detention, post-adjudication, and pending placement to an out-of-home treatment program. Previously, youths in this status were not able to receive treatment and had to wait until they had been placed before they could make progress on certain components of their treatment service plans. Due to the overall lower population within detention centers, DJS opened pending placement units, 2 at BCJJC and 1 at the Cheltenham Youth Detention Center. The department reports that the pending placement units have maintained an average daily population of approximately 24 youths since opening in July 2023. And these youths receive an average of 4.1 treatment hours per week, such as individual and family therapy sessions or psychoeducational groups led by clinicians. The department reports that approximately 80% of the 351 youths who've participated in the units were waiting for a placement to a DJS treatment facility. Some youth may be kept pending placement due to recent facility closures by DJS, some of which may be temporary and some of which are permanent. The facility master's plan describes 3 properties as temporarily closed: the Alfred D. Noyes Children's Center, the Garrett Children's Center, and the Meadow Mountain Youth Center. Noyes was the detention center with the ability to serve male and female youth. The Garrett Children's Center was a staff secure committed treatment facility for male youth, and the MMYC also provided staff secure committed treatment beds for male youth. In its testimony, DJS should comment on why the use of pending placement units at detention facilities is preferable to reopening temporarily closed staff secure treatment centers. Though temporarily closed facilities could be reopened, DJS has permanently closed 5 facilities since May 2016, as shown in Exhibit 6. These facilities offered 42 detention beds, 31 staff secure committed beds, and 14 hardware secure committed beds. The master plan also includes information about recent and planned DJS initiatives, including the launch of the Youth Opportunities Learning Occupations Academy. DJS will develop the YOLO Academy as a residential treatment program focused on workforce development and employment opportunities. The planned launch date is January 2026. DJS should comment on how many youths the YOLO Academy will serve and whether it will be available for male and or female youth. The allowance includes funding for 1 project, as previously mentioned, the Maryland Youth Residence Center renovation and expansion. This project will renovate a facility in Baltimore City and add a 2-story addition to create a 24-bed hardware secure treatment facility for male youth. Last year, the legislature authorized $1.43 million in design funds for this purpose, and the current request is for $1.15 million to continue design. The total project cost is now estimated at $49.7 million, approximately 7.7% higher than was planned under the 2024 CIP. This project would expand the statewide committed treatment capacity from 91 beds to 115. It would be the only committed treatment facility located in Baltimore City. Other facilities for male youth are located in Allegheny, Frederick, and Garrett counties. The project received Part 1 and Part 2 program approval from DBM on December 20th of 2024, and the design phase will now begin in July 2025. DJS should update the committees on the progress that it's been made to procure the project's architect. Returning to page 2 of the analysis, I'll also note that the allowance includes a $1.5 million deauthorization associated with the Cheltenham Youth Treatment Center project. This project has been canceled. DLS recommends approving the $1.15 million authorization and the deauthorization for the Department of Juvenile Services. I'd be happy to take any questions from the committee at this time.
Great, thank you very much, Ms. Miller, for the presentation. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee? Today we have from the Department of Juvenile Services, the Secretary, Vincent Schiraldi.
Good evening, Chair Chang and members of the committee. I'm Vinny Schiraldi, Secretary of the Department of Juvenile Services. At the table with me are Colette Coleman-Price, Director of Capital Planning, Design, and Leasing, and Kara Annenson, Director of Legislation, Policy, and Reform. I want to thank Ms. Miller for her thoughtful analysis and our continued partnership. We have one capital project, the Maryland Youth Residence Center, and we support its continued funding. We were asked to comment on 4 issues in the analysis. First one is on page 8 regarding the facility renewal program. We were asked to comment on which planned projects in the facilities master plan may be eligible for the Department of General Services Facility Renewal Program. Our response is that the projects that are eligible for the DGS Facility Renewal Program will be submitted through the Project Justification Preventative Maintenance Operation, or PMO, package submission process, which is due in mid-March. The department's been working diligently to conduct a thorough review of all prior pending and current DGS level, it's not easy to say, it's DGS level, and PMO-related, facility-related projects while maintaining ongoing communication with DGS to determine the best path forward. Additional, we're focused on aligning the new facilities master plan and fostering a transparent approach to these efforts. Next, on page 11, we were asked to explain why using pending placement units in detention facilities is preferable to reopening temporarily closed staff-secure treatment centers. We established these pending placement units within our detention facilities to address the challenges faced by youth awaiting placement for an available bed, and they've worked out very well so far. So what used to happen before was that kids would just sit and wait till they got to go to their residential treatment program, and unlike adults, that waiting time doesn't count towards their ultimate cessation of their sentence because they weren't getting the treatment that they needed to complete before they could leave. So instead of having them just sit there and wait, we essentially brought that treatment to these 3 units so that they could begin their treatment as soon as they possibly could. This has worked out really well in a couple of ways. One is that the kids in those units are behaving better. They used to be just bouncing off the walls because they hadn't started their treatment yet while they waited. But the other is because they're front-loading that treatment while they're in, let's say, BCJJC, when they ultimately get to Victor Cullen, they have less time to serve because they've already begun their course of treatment. If we were to open up one of these closed facilities that we have, it takes about 141 people to staff a 25-bed facility. I'll say that again so that you didn't think I made a mistake. It takes about 141 people to staff a 25-bed facility, and that doesn't include the teachers. That's just our frontline staff, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, nurses, maintenance people, admins. So that's extraordinarily expensive, whereas when we just opened an empty facility in one of the detention facilities, there's a lot more scale savings. So we did that for efficiency purposes and to get the kids the treatment they need as soon as they possibly could. So next on page 12, we're asked about how many youth the YOLO Academy would serve and whether it will be available for male or female youth. Just before I say that, I just want to say the YOLO Academy is really cool. It is going to create vocational training for young people who either have a high school diploma or a GED or who are on that track and aren't in regular school, so they can start with vocational programming like used to happen in lots of our high schools and has not happened often in high schools. So that we anticipate that will accommodate 20 male youth And that's because when we look at how many young people in our residential treatment centers either have a high school diploma or are on a GED track, it ends up being about 20 youth. And then finally, we've been asked on page 14 to provide an update on the progress that's been made to procure the MYRC's project's architect. So we're working, as I said, with DGS, and DGS has submitted to their procurement all the documentation required to procure the architectural professional services. That occurred during the week of February 10th, last week, and DGS project managers are waiting on their procurement office to advise that all documents have been uploaded to Emma for the architectural solicitation. So we expect that to happen very soon. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Secretary Schiraldi. We have a question from Delegate Metzger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I have a couple questions, and I'm struggling with the fact we've got so many of these units closed, and if they're sitting empty, are they going to be for sale, or are you just, for an example, the question I have, not long ago, if I recall, we upgraded Savage Mountain, I think it was, and we spent quite a bit of money on that. Now it's closed.
What was always, yeah, it's been closed, it's never reopened, I guess.
Never reopened after they remodeled it.
Correct.
Why didn't they remodel, I mean, why didn't they open it after they remodeled it?
So the population had declined substantially enough to not warrant reopening it. I think that when, you know, the thing about capital is that you're always forecasting. And so, remember, this all happened under my predecessor, Sam Abed.
Right. I'm just trying to justify spending more money.
No, I understand.
On a place that's brand new almost, and we're closed, and we can't transfer those young people there. I'm just curious.
Sure, but then we'd have to hire 141 staff to staff it. So, I mean, there's only, right now, there's 6 kids pending placement in Victor Cullen, which is our hardware secure facility. If we opened up Garrett,
right,
which is now that's called, for 6 kids, we'd have to hire 141 staff to staff the facility. So they're getting an equivalent amount of treatment in that pending placement unit at BCJJC. They're closer to their families. So when we do family therapy, the families actually come. It didn't seem warranted to open up Garrett.
Okay, I understand. And the final question I've got is, I'm just curious, so I need to hear this from you on the ultimate goal for this remodel expansion project, 41 million, I believe you said, ultimate.
Yes.
What is the ultimate goal when we get it done?
Oh, to have the kids close to their families, to work, to treatment services.
Convenience.
Excuse me?
Convenience?
I wouldn't call it convenience. I mean, it's more than convenient if a family member can sit there and do family therapy with their kid that's, you know, been troublesome enough to get sent to a locked facility. For me, that's a public safety issue. If they don't work out those issues with their families, and if they don't have a good job, they don't have it all set up when they come home, which is a lot easier to do right in Baltimore City.
So will they be given the opportunity to learn auto mechanics or hands-on kind of things?
Exactly. And so what we're going to be doing, what we do now, actually, with our on-campus work program is young people go out of the facility to work jobs, mostly with the Department of Natural Resources and the Department of the Environment. So they're getting work experience, but most of them live in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Prince George's County, Anne Arundel, and Montgomery County. That's probably 9 out of 10 kids. And so they're not going to stay in Garrett County or Allegheny County. They're going to come back, and if I was able to send them out, and we don't send them out right away, they have to earn their way up a level and show trust, and then they can earn their way to go out and work. If I can have them working in a mechanics or on one of Jake Day's construction projects, which we're in the process of negotiating right now, then they can keep that job when they come out.
I think out loud a lot of times, so you got to hear me what I'm about to say. Does a lot of these young people today play the video games?
Not in my facility.
Well, the reason why I'm saying that is, you know, air traffic controllers could be a taught skill.
Yep.
And air traffic controllers today is in much need.
Yep.
And aircraft mechanics, Southwest Airlines has told us, you hire aircraft mechanics, we'll hire everyone you've got. So I'm gearing in on that. So if you don't mind, and culinary arts as well, so
Yep,
chefs.
culinary arts too, absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Do you have any other questions for Department of Juvenile Services? Great, thank you very much. That concludes the hearing for Department of Juvenile Services. The committee will now move on to the Maryland Environmental Service, which is our budget analyst, Samuel Queist.
Thank you. The Maryland Environmental Service capital budget includes funding for the State Water and Sewer Infrastructure Improvement Fund, which provides funding for improvements at state-owned and operated water and wastewater treatment plants. The fiscal 2026 budget allowance includes $2.6 million in general obligation bond funding for projects at 2 state-owned facilities, as well as $5.6 million in non-budgeted funding for projects at 4 DNR state park facilities. A list of the projects and more details on each of them are found on pages 3 through 6 of the analysis. The 2 state-owned projects funded through GEO bond funding include the Charlotte Hall Veterans Home Wastewater Treatment Upgrade Project and the Maryland Correctional Institution Wastewater Treatment Program Headworks and Facility Improvement Project. The Charlotte Hall Veterans Home Project received initial funding for design in fiscal 23, and at that time it was projected that construction would begin in fiscal 24. However, due to delays in the design stage of the project, the construction funding is now in the fiscal 26 budget. There's also a fiscal 27 pre-authorization in the budget bill for this program. This pre-authorization is for $2.3 million in GEO bond funding. However, MES and the Department of Veterans and Military Families is working to submit a federal grant application to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, which, if successful, that would result in this pre-authorization and future state funding not be needed. It's anticipated that the award for that grant will be announced in calendar 2025. The MCI Wastewater Treatment Program project is a new project receiving initial funding in fiscal 26 for design for the project. The 4 non-budgeted projects at DNR facilities include the Point Lookout State Park Power Distribution Project, the Point Lookout State Park Wastewater Treatment Program Upgrade Project, the Fort Frederick State Park Water Distribution Project, and the Janes Island State Park Water Main Extension and Power Distribution Improvement Projects. On the top of page 7, there is a discussion of some additional projects that were initially planned for fiscal 26, but were ultimately not included for various reasons. There's also a mention of encumbrance and expenditure of previously authorized funds, noting that there are $39.5 million in previously authorized program funding that is yet to be encumbered. On the bottom of page 7 and the top of page 8, there's a discussion of program contingency funding. Although unallocated funds are not included in the program, as has been done in some previous years, there are contingencies of between 15 and 20% for projects in the program. The analysis notes that this is somewhat higher than contingency percentages for other capital programs due to the complex nature of some of these projects. Lastly, there's an operating budget impact statement for the Point Lookout State Park wastewater treatment upgrade due to some of those upgrades. The DLS recommendation is to approve the general obligation bond funding for the program, and that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quist, for that analysis. We appreciate it. Are there any questions for the budget analyst? Hearing none, we'll call Dr. Charles C. Glass, the Executive Director of the Maryland Environmental Services, for his response. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Dr. Charles Glass. I'm the Executive Director at MES. With me today also is Deputy Furketic. First, on behalf of MES, we'd like to thank Mr. Samuel Quist and the entire DLS team for their thorough analysis on both our operating and capital budgets. You have our written testimony, which urges adoption of the capital budget requests. And as you heard with the DLS presentation, DLS concurs with this approach. Project contingency funds, with respect to the project contingency funds in the BRFA, I want to make clear that we are not seeking to fully fund these increases at this time. These increased levels will be funded over many years. We know that they're necessary for what's happened with some of our capital improvements with the cost of these improvements, but we have no interest in raising funds and requesting those funds. If I could, I'd like to add in a couple of things since we're at the end of the day for you. Our vacancy rate is currently 3.2%. We have a goal of 5%, and we maintain a 3.2% rate right now. We've done this through a summer internship program and a new rotational fellowship program, where we'll have one engineer and one environmental specialist that we'll fund through overhead. We've had an extreme amount of success in attracting. This closes on Friday. We have over 150 applicants for the one position in environmental specialist and over 40 applicants for the engineering role. Our MB numbers, we hit 33% in FY24 for MBs, and we're very proud of that. And we're also proud of being named top workplace in both the Baltimore Sun, Washington Post, and USA Today for multiple years, 3 years in a row. So that's all due to the success of our 800 staff. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, thank you, Dr. Glass, for ending our day on a really positive note. We appreciate you bringing that information forward and the work you're doing to give young people the opportunity to work within your department. Are there any questions for Dr. Glass? Seeing none, that ends the Capital Budget Subcommittee meeting for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.